Good morning, everybody. This is Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. A warm thanks to Manitou Fund, our presenting sponsor, and to the Board of Directors of the Film Festival, as well to the staff and the volunteers. I have to say that in 21 years running the film festival, we have never assembled a more impressive slate of writers for the writers panel. Among the writers, it includes a Pulitzer Prize winner, a Nobel Prize winner in literature, a Cannes winner, and so on and so on. Before we bring all the writers out, we will be watching clips from their respective films. So take a look, and we'll be immediately right back. Thank you. Please give a warm welcome. All the writers, by the way, are Oscar nominated. So please welcome Todd Field, Tar. Pulitzer Prize winner, Tony Kushner, The Fabelmans. Sarah Polley, Women Talking. Ruben Östlund, Triangle of Sadness. Ryan Johnson, Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery. Martin McDonagh, The Banshees of Inisherin. Leslie Patterson, All Quiet on the Western Front. Nobel Prize winner for literature, Kazuo Ishiguro. And Daniel Scheinert, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And please give a warm welcome to Ann Thompson, who's been doing this for 18 years. Editor-at-large at IndieWire.
Yes. That's impossible. Don't take me away. All right. Welcome back to my favorite panel. I love this panel. It's just... Welcome back to my favorite panel, where we hear from the year's most lauded and gifted screenwriters. And 4 of this group of Oscar nominees adapted their screenplay. For Living, which is also nominated for the Best Oscar for Bill Nye, Nobel Prize-winning novelist Kazuo Ishiguro took Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru and elegantly moved it from 1952 Japan to England in the same period. For his comedy sequel, Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery, writer-director Ryan Johnson crafted another twisty whodunit featuring Daniel Craig's detective Benoit Blanc, a surprise guest at an island retreat hosted by billionaire Miles Braun, Edward Norton. For All Quiet on the Western Front, screenwriter Leslie Patterson adapted with writing partner Ian Stokell and German director Edward Berger, Eric Maria Remarque's classic anti-war World War I novel. And for Women Talking, writer-director Sarah Polley adapted the Canadian writer Miriam Toews, her novel, which reimagined events that took place in an isolated Bolivian Mennonite community where the women and the girls were systematically abused and raped. Tony Kushner, with his frequent collaborator, Steven Spielberg, wrote an original script about a real person, the filmmaker himself. The Fabelmans is a unique hybrid, part director origin myth, coming-of-age drama, and dysfunctional family saga. And 4 of the movies that we're talking about tonight are entirely original. Runaway, $100 million global hit, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, sprang out of the fertile brains of writer-directors Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. We have one of them with us tonight. who assembled an incomparable ensemble led by Oscar nominees Michelle Yeoh, Ki-hee Kwan, Stephanie Hsu, and Jamie Lee Curtis. And then we have auteur Todd Field down at the end there. He followed up Oscar nominees In the Bedroom and Little Children with Tar. Which stars, of course, Oscar-nominated Cate Blanchett as the title character, a hard-driving American conductor for a major European orchestra who struggles to stay on top. Martin McDonagh in the middle there, London Irish playwright, screenwriter, and director, followed up his Oscar-winning 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri with his 4th feature, The Banshees of Inisherin, set in rural Ireland. In 1922, where old chums Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, both Oscar-nominated, fall out of friendship. And Swedish director Ruben Östlund had the audacity to go after a second Palme d'Or after Oscar-nominated art world satire The Square and win for Triangle of Sadness, his first English language feature. This time, the filmmaker takes hilarious aim at influencer models and billionaires who encounter stormy seas on a luxury yacht cruise. Say that fast, yacht cruise, okay. Congratulations all, thanks for being here. So I want each of you to give us a very short resume of how you became a screenwriter. And we will start with Kazuo.
Oh, I didn't know that. Are you going to start with me? Okay, look, well, it's really interesting to see that, I mean, most people here are not like hard-bitten screenwriters. They've been directors or they've been like world-conquering athletes. I mean, it's just bizarre. Playwrights who've written maybe one of the greatest stage plays of our era and so on. It's an interesting bunch. I find myself in interesting company. I too have come. My trajectory has not been typical. I spent 40 years, thinking about novels. Almost every single day of my life, I've been thinking about the novel I was writing. Well, maybe not every single day. Maybe. The day I got married, I was thinking of something else, something like that. But and I've only written 8 novels in 40 years. And I think they're actually all about the same thing. And so I'm not that particularly productive. And at a certain point, absolutely the next step for me, thematically, artistically, seemed to be to return to a Kurosawa movie that had made a huge impact on me when I was 11 years old. And made a huge impact on my life. And I think I see now, looking back on the books that I wrote, particularly books like The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, books that essentially ask the question, if you realize that your life is fairly short, what is it that really matters? There are stories about people who say, all right, my life is small, it's humble, that's all right. But please God, let it be not empty, not meaningless. Let me be able to say I lived a good life. Maybe even a magnificent one, even if it's a small one. And it seemed to me, going back to living, this film that kind of started me on the long journey, felt like the right thing to do right now. And it's something I really wanted to do. And I found myself in the back of a cab with the great British actor Bill Nighy. And I just had this kind of eureka moment. And I thought, well, we could remake it as an English film with Bill Nighy, built around him. It would marry all the things I've been thinking about over these 40 years with this kind of starting point of the Kurosawa film. So that's how I end up here. I didn't win triathlons or anything like that.
We will get to that. We will get to that. For the moment, Ryan, give us your story.
Well, can I also say these are the comfiest panel chairs of all time. So if I nod off, I started just as I think I kind of learned how to make movies just growing up making them with my friends as a kid, and that's part of the reason I loved Fabelmans so much, loved Tony and Steven's movie, is because that evoked kind of, and so I started not thinking in terms of screenwriting, production, post, but just thinking in terms of getting my friends together and making the movie. And I feel like it's been a process for me of falling in love with writing as a craft once I started actually doing it and trying desperately to get better at it and to kind of, you know, earn the title writer. And so, yeah, but I wrote movies just to be able to get friends together and make them, and I've been, you know, trying to kind of get better at that specifically, yeah.
Leslie, how did you become a screenwriter?
Yeah, probably not your normal route. I was a professional triathlete, and and let's just say I've found purpose and meaning through suffering. And the other side is when I was spending hours and hours running through the moors of Scotland, I often would create an alter ego for myself, somewhat of a superhero. And I think just that imagination of really like allowing those worlds to just come to life, and I was out training for hours and hours on my own, just kind of built this imagination within me, and that's how I got into the world of writing.
Sarah?
So I had been an actor since I was a child, and I remember there was this turning point where when I was about 20 and I was supposed to be in this really big movie, and I found myself dropping out of it and realizing I didn't want to do it. And then sort of having this depression around that and realizing, this maybe isn't what I want to do. And I'd always wanted to be a writer of books since I was a child. And I remember in the middle of this depression going to see The Thin Red Line. And by the end of that movie, I had been lifted and carried out of a depression. And it was just the most extraordinary thing to realize that, first of all, that movies weren't all stupid, because that was my general relationship to film at that point, and how powerful it could be. And so I set about making a short film and realizing it to be a writer, I could do it in this context of a world that I knew. It was a terrible short film. Everything about it was terrible, but I loved it so much. And just realizing that I could find that voice that I'd always wanted to be connected to, but within the world that I knew.
Daniel?
Yeah, so other Daniel barfed all last night. That's why he's not here. But we came up in music videos, and neither of us really saw ourselves as writers. I've always been like a very collaborative person. Todd.
I guess that's called a mic drop.
You can go.
That was for Dan.
No. Yeah, so I've always been a collaborative filmmaker, like Ryan. Like I just came up making things with my friends, and then met Dan, and he was one of the best writers I'd ever met, but he never finished anything, and so I started like convincing him to finish stuff. And while making music videos, we kind of discovered a writing process together that wasn't like as traditional as like Final Draft Pro. It was like listening to music and coming up with a story that would fit with it. And so we kind of stumbled forward into like, I'd love to make a movie. I don't like these screenplays that our manager is showing us. Let's write one. But like we had imposter syndrome all along, but kind of we're always, it was writing because we wanted to direct it that we kind of discovered our process and that we were writers.
Todd?
I was cheap. I was about ready to start a directing fellowship at the American Film Institute, and I was told I was supposed to arrive with 3 short scripts, and I believed them. Many people didn't in that class, but I did. And we had this sick cat. I remember that we had sort of maybe perhaps misnamed, named Kia, K-I-A. And you'll understand why that's probably problematic in a moment. But I'd never written a script before, and my father-in-law is the great screenwriter Bo Goldman, and I was left alone with this cat. My wife went off with her parents, and I said to Bo, how do you do this, you know? And he said, are you ready? I said, yeah. He said, it's really simple. Write this down. Unplug the phone. Get up at the same hour every day. Write at the same hour. And after 30 days, you'll have something. It might be terrible, but you'll have something to work with. And that seemed really daunting. But at the same time, I was taking care of this terribly sick cat. And that was kind of a horrible thing, but a kind of wonderful thing at the same time, because I was so devoted to the cat and so desperate to keep it alive, and I had to do all these things to do that, that the writing of the script kind of felt like short beer, you know? And that was it. I didn't read any screenwriting books or anything like that. It was kind of it, and that's kind of what I still do, I guess. But the cat died. Yeah. It was awful.
Martin, it's your turn.
That's really sad, Todd. I started off with writing plays that killed cats in the middle of them. And it all worked out fine from there. No, so I started off as a playwright, but always was much more fond of movies, but tried to make plays that were sort of cinematic on stage, I guess. But sort of knew that the dream was always to write a movie script. And after maybe 10 years of the plays going well, I wrote a short film, but knew I had to direct it to...
I think you won an Oscar for it?
Beginner's luck. But knowing that one had to direct something you've got so much control, as Tony knows, in theatre. They can't change a word. You cast the actors, you pick the director. But as we all know, that in movies, that's not quite the same case for a screenwriter. So made that little leap into short films. Didn't have a great time. It turned out okay. And then wrote In Bruges and just took control of that and tried to learn on the job.
And Ruben.
Well, yeah, it's hard to... Okay, I will try to explain my process, because I think it's the only way to describe how I started to write down things. I always start with discussing an idea with, for example, Eric that is here, the producer. We have a production company together, and we're starting to talk about what are we going to do. And then when we get the feeling of a certain kind of idea, I'm starting to pitch it to as many people as I can. Everyone I meet, I try to pitch the project and get to know the project. And then when I know how to pitch the project from the beginning to the end, then I can sit and write it down. But before that point, I can't really sit down and write, because I need to have limitations on where I'm going when I'm writing. Otherwise, I think it's a too painful process, basically, to sit there with a blank page and I don't know where I'm going. And one thing that I feel that is happening for me when I have that process of telling people, okay, my next film is called The Entertainment System is Down. It takes place on a long-haul flight when the entertainment system is stopped working.
This is his next project.
Exactly. Then people come up with great ideas to me. They say, you have to hear what I've experienced on a flight. And then I steal the best ideas and just put them into the script.
So Kazuo, I'm actually curious to know why you thought that... Did I miss anybody? Tony Kushner,
Somebody.
of course.
Somebody.
I missed the great playwright of Tony, how did you become a screenwriter? You were supposed to be after Sarah. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I met Stephen. I mean, that's sort of the... I had done Angels in America, the film version with Mike Nichols, and then right after Angels was about to come out on HBO, I edited an anthology of essays by progressive Jew. It was called Wrestling with Zion, 58 progressive Jewish American responses to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And Kathy Kennedy called me and asked me to have breakfast. And she told me that Stephen was working on a movie about the Munich Olympics massacre. And I said, look, I just published a book about it. I wasn't auditioning for the job. I just said, do you want to read the anthology? And she said yes. And then I figured that would be the end of it. And then 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from Stephen, who had read the anthology and asked me if I'd like to talk about this movie. And then he hired me to do a draft of Munich. And that was 19 years ago. And that's what I've been doing ever since, is working for Stephen. So, you know, I mean, I don't know that I feel like I'm a screenwriter. I feel like I'm his screenwriter. Some days I feel like I'm like Garfunkel to his Simon. And then some days I feel like Clifford Odets on the bad days and think I'm, you know, someday I'll get back to writing plays. So, you know, it's, but it's been, I've had a great time doing it, so that's it.
So far, so good. So Kazuo, I am curious to know why you thought Bill Nighy was the perfect actor to play this part and why he inspired you.
Well, this is slightly dangerous because I know the original Japanese movie is regarded as a great classic, but I always thought, and it is a wonderful film, but even when I was a boy, I thought I would have preferred it with a different leading actor. And there's some of you may know Ozu's movies, Tokyo Story, Autumn Afternoon, Late Spring. There's an actor who plays the father figure in all of them, a guy called Chishu Ryu. And I found myself sitting next to Bill Nighy in a cab, and I thought he looks like Chishu Ryu. And actually, you know, I've been a huge fan of Bill Nighy's work, as most people in England are. And I thought, well, actually, not only does he look a bit like Chishu Ryu, he has all the great qualities as an actor that Ryu had. I think both Bill and Chishu Ryu are two of the great actors who can express emotion through restraint. Yeah, there's so much, you know, layers and layers are going on underneath, and yet they present themselves in a very stoic, controlled way. And it's that, I thought that way of going into things would work really well with what I wanted to do anyway. I mean, I think Kurosawa did a fantastic job. I'm not criticizing him, but I thought, and so that's how I pitched it to Stephen Woody, the producer.
So these two cultures, Japan and England, somehow it works to transpose this story. Why is that?
Well, I think it's essentially a universal story because it as I said in my, at the beginning, I think it comes down to something very simple and basic. You know, how it's an acknowledgement that it's very easy to waste your life because, you know, it just goes by so fast. But you don't have to be, you know, I think both films say, you know, point out, you don't have to be some kind of superstar to just, you know, to have a great life. You know, you can make a small life something heroic and magnificent. And there was that message meant an awful lot to me when I was young and when I was growing up because, you know, I never dreamt I'd be on a panel like this or receiving a Nobel Prize. I just thought I was going to have a normal life. And that was a very important message for me, that a good, even a heroic life did not depend on this kind of exterior acclaim. You know, it was something else. And I think this is a really important universal idea that transcends particular settings. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's for me personally, it's the Japanese and English thing. And for me, there's a lot of a lot of stuff about Englishness that I wanted to do within the film. But essentially, I think we're talking about a universal idea that I think will apply to all people as we go through into the future in every kind of society.
Why did you come up with the title Living?
I didn't have much imagination. I mean, when the Japanese movie was shown in the few art house cinemas in England, it was called Living.
I didn't know that.
I really, yeah, you got a good point. I should have sat down and thought of something a little bit more catchy.
So Ryan, you were topping Knives Out, which was a tall order. You wrote this during lockdown. How did that affect your process in this film?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm guessing based on the timing, there are other people.
A lot of people
on the
did.
Panel that probably did too. I guess one thing it did kind of force, the method of turn the phone off and besides learning how to make sourdough bread, I didn't have much else to do. So, but I mean, I guess the big thing for me is I ended up putting it in the movie a big part of kind of approaching the first movie, Knives Out, and then also this one was my love of the whodunit genre and. I guess my frustration, although I mean I love all the whodunit movies I watched growing up, but the fact that they're all period pieces, and they're mostly period pieces set in England, and in this kind of fuzzy other kind of nostalgic world, and feeling like the whodunit as a genre is a specifically good machine at kind of creating a microcosm that can be used to take a look at things, and so and it hadn't really been used as that for a while. It turned into the kind of this cozy artifact, which I dearly love. But I thought, boy, it would be really interesting to take this genre and set it in unapologetically in the here and now, let go of any notion of timelessness, because that's what Christie was doing back in her day. She wasn't writing period pieces. Through her whole life, she was writing present-day stories. So, which meant while I was sitting down in the middle of, in the middle of the lockdown, it was like, okay, well, and I figured out a way to write that into the story itself, which is a little bit of a hold your breath and do it type thing. But yeah, and I try to do it with a light touch because very serious thing, and it's a deeply unserious movie. So, but it felt like, yeah, this is one thing we're all going through. Given the marching orders, it should be in there.
So were you just diving into all your favorite old crazy 70s whodunit movies? I mean, what was the research?
Yeah, I mean, they live rent-free in my head. I didn't really have to. So, I mean, but I was obviously The Last of Sheila, which, yes. But I will always hype The Last of Sheila because I feel like there's still a lot of people who haven't seen it. If you haven't seen The Last of Sheila, please seek it out. It's a fantastic 70s whodunit that was written by Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim. I see that little noise you get from the audience when you say that and so it's an incredibly fun film, and yeah, Glass Onion takes a big page from it.
And who was your villain inspired by? It seems like you knew the future when you wrote this. Yeah, no, I mean, the reality is I don't know. When I was writing, it was kind of a different set of tech douchebags who seemed like they were ruining the world. There's a lot of churn. It keeps turning over. But the reality is, when I was writing it, also though, the more specifically I thought about any one person, the less interesting it quickly became. And it also it's not very interesting just taking the piss out of one person, or taking a piss out of tech people, or the rich. Just finger wagging is not that interesting. What to me was a lot more interesting is kind of the power structure that results from that in society, and kind of these people's place. And also our relationship, my relationship to them, kind of the way that, and I know I have that thing inside myself that, I don't know if it's a uniquely American thing, probably not at this point, of mistaking wealth for competence. And I know I'm very guilty of that. And how, as much as I love to sling shit at these people, there's something deep down inside that also thinks maybe they'll be Willy Wonka and take us up in the great glass elevator to Mars at the end of the day and save us all. There is still that little thing inside that is like unescapable, and I guess recognizing that in myself and kind of
writing to the dynamics that come about because of that was more interesting than just making fun of what's his name.
So Leslie, tell us how being a triathlete actually made All Quiet on the Western Front come into being.
Yeah, so my partner Ian and I, we optioned the materials 16 years ago, so it's been a long time to get off the ground. And I think that, we've overcome many obstacles to maintain the option and gone down many pathways. When you're very much on the outside of the industry and you're up and coming, it's difficult to get those doors to open. So you have to continually sidestep and navigate that to try and get it moving. And everything in this industry is about timing, because certainly 16 years ago, we could not have done this film, probably in German. World War I was not a popular war to cover, so to raise any kind of finance for that was virtually impossible. So I think, it's kind of the perfect timing that Ed came along when he did, and we have this beautiful film.
You didn't answer the triathlete part.
I did not. Sorry. I think just the endurance of sport, overcoming adversity. Certainly in my heyday, I was training about 6 or 7 hours a day. So, you're constantly tired. You're constantly waking up in the morning thinking, I cannot do this. And so you have to segment everything. You have to really break it down and take it into small chunks. And I really think that is a lot like screenwriting. If you see it as a whole, you get very overwhelmed very quickly. So you break it up. And then it's ever changing. You have to be malleable. When you're an athlete training as much as I do, you have many injuries. You have dealt with chronic Lyme disease and illness. So again, you're thinking, how can I achieve what I want to achieve in the way you least expect it? And that is exactly like screenwriting and filmmaking.
Okay.
Isn't it? Come on, folks.
Yes.
So you come from a rich British tradition of telling war stories.
Right.
Why was this German story so important to you? Why did you actually ran a triathlon while you were wounded in order to get the option for this? You needed the money in order to get the option for this renewed.
Yep.
You were willing to do that.
It's true, yeah. I'd actually broken my shoulder the day before the race. And the only way to maintain this option was to win this race. So, yeah. Let's just say that swimming a mile with one arm is incredibly challenging. So I came out the water 12 minutes down, I think, and then rode up to second and ran into the wind. So that was another sort of example, I guess. You just got to keep going sometimes. But yeah, I think for me, for this story, seeing it from the other side was such a huge piece of why we wanted to really struggle to get it off the ground, because we're so used to seeing sort of the Germans as the enemy and that there's no humanity around them. And really, this is a story about, the betrayal of the youthful generation, regardless of which country that you're from. And that's why it's so potent. We're so polarized now in today's society with the way that we think.
How did you come up with that opening sequence? There's an extraordinary opening sequence where you're following the uniforms.
Yeah, so I came up with this idea when I was out on a run one day, and I'd actually watched Schindler's List the night before, and I love the sequence with the girl with the red coat, if anyone remembers that. And we were trying to really figure out, we wanted to open the film with a battle sequence in the trenches to really hook that audience in, but we wanted to go back to our main character and have that, patriotic fervor and have him signing up. And we thought, how can we do this, And that's when thematically I really thought that following the uniform back, so the soldier actually dies in the opening sequence. That's not our main character, but we follow his uniform as it goes back to Germany. It's sewn up, it's washed, and it's passed on to our main character. And that for me represents the entire theme of the film, which is the uniform means more than the man.
Right. So Sarah, the degree of difficulty that you faced in turning this book into a movie was really high. You had to make it work dramatically and cinematically. It was 8 women in a barn talking to each other. Is it true that you actually did a pass on the script from every single character's perspective?
Yeah, I had to, because I had to track each of the characters, even through the scenes where they weren't speaking. And everything that gets said in that room impacts the characters who are there. Sometimes things are transformative for them, even if they're not participating in the conversation. So I think to just give each of them their space and their respect, I had to write a draft as though they were the only main character. And I think I did 2 passes for everybody, and then there were a couple of characters that I was still dropping the thread on in important ways, and so I did another one for them. So yeah, it was a long process.
So you made the decision to leave the threat off screen. Why did you do that? And did it make it more challenging, or was that an easier way to approach it?
I think it was instinctually. I just never saw the function or the importance of showing sexual assault on screen in this film. This film is so much about how these characters move alongside that trauma and through it together in community, and so not about the details of what happened. I also find as a viewer that seeing sexual assault on screen is rarely additive and often becomes fetishized, even and unintentionally. So I wouldn't make a general rule of it for every filmmaker, but for me, I can't think of a time where it helped me understand a film better. And ultimately, it can be really hard for people to watch. So, thank you.
Thank you. Tony, hello. When you discovered that Spielberg had a personal story to tell, and that was back around Munich, right?
Yeah.
It took a long time to get that story told. Was it like pulling teeth? Was it difficult? How did you get him to agree to tell it?
It wasn't really pulling teeth. I never thought I have no idea whether or not he would have done this eventually on his own. I think he would have. He had thought about it before we met. We talked about it as a joke for the first 10 years or so of our working together. Every once in a while, I would say, and then there's always the camping trip story, and he would laugh at it. And at one point, I wrote a treatment of another episode in his life that happens actually chronologically after the Fabelmans. So maybe it'll be a sequel. I don't know, but that I think would also make a kind of an amazing film, and I think maybe that helped move it a little bit, seeing actually words on paper. And then when we were working on West Side Story, his mother had died and his father was 102. Arnold was moving into a sort of serious decline, and I think Stephen was sort of bracing for the loss of his father, and we were fighting all the time because West Side Story was really, really incredibly hard to do, and I screamed and yelled at him all the time. And I think he sort of said, let's get together and start doing interviews about my past as a way of kind of reassuring himself and me that we still loved each other. And then I think it was that rehearsal period for West Side Story that kind of started it, and then it, and then he really got interested after that. And then I broke my shoulder. I was running an
So you were
sorry,
using...
Sarah, Leslie, when you were saying Sarah turned to me and said, okay, she wins. It's like, yeah, it's like...
wins everything.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
But fighting with him over West Side Story is a little bit different than fighting with him over his story. That must have been challenging.
Yeah, I scream and yell a lot, and he puts up with it. I don't, and we had we struggled a lot with Lincoln, and we struggled a lot with West Side Story. With the Fabelmans, I sort of decided that I was going to have to scream and yell less because it's his story, and we were co-writing the script, and we really wrote the script together, word for word. So in some ways it was less contentious than, in many ways less
You
contentious.
were more deferential in
More
some ways.
deferential and kind of, it was a terrifying film for him to make because he'd never done anything quite, you know, it was in the 6th decade of filmmaking and 38 films or something like that, and he had never really done anything quite like this before that's really entirely sort of character-driven and about intimate things, and also that feeling of betrayal that you have if you put your family. I kept talking to him about Eugene O'Neill and Long Day's Journey into Night. I mean, this feeling of breaking a taboo. I mean, violating the sort of, you know, secret economy of the family and putting that on film was hard. So everybody, I think the actors also felt that we were all kind of like saying to him, you know, keep going and doing it. And then with Stephen Always, there's this kind of remarkable thing that happens on set that the thing that scares him the most becomes, he starts to realize how to use it and work with it. So by the end, you know, he was really doing, I think, extraordinary things with incredibly painful, intimate moments. And, you know, that's...
So I was just curious in the writing because it's such an unusually structured movie. It's just not like anything else that I've ever seen. Yeah, and how did you just roll with that? I mean, did you try to fit it into something else, or did you recognize that it had to be the way it was?
I think, I don't know that we really, I mean, I think the weirdness of it is that it's sort of an epic structure, epic episodic structure, but it's about a very intimate, you know, thing that usually benefits from a compression of time, and, you know, we didn't talk about it. I wrote an 81-page novella kind of thing to get us going, where I took every single memory he'd ever told me and turned it into this kind of weird story. And then we boiled that down into an outline. And we wrote it very quickly in 2 months. And then as we were reworking it and showing it to Stephen's friends like Tom Stoppard and getting advice from people, the one thing we never let go of was that it needed to cover, you know, 3 states and 12 years, and we just had a sense that that would work, and it did. So
it did. It did. Thank you, Daniel. So tell me a little bit. Did you turn down a Marvel movie to make this?
Not really. But I do think that, like, after we made our first movie, there was this thought of like, oh, we're one of those Sundance guys that maybe the next thing we're supposed to do is a Marvel movie. And like in a sense, we wrote this instead, like just like because we were kind of talking about like what would we say if Kevin calls, and that'd be so scary, and like I don't know what I'd say, and in a way, this is our Marvel movie, you know? Like, we were like, this is...
Multiverses.
Yeah, but like, and that wasn't really their genre at the time. It was just like, but it was like, what's our favorite action movie? Like, what would we have to say? Like, and we started talking about Kung Fu films and The Matrix and our families. And like, oh, that would make an interesting movie. So I guess the headline was that we turned down Loki, cool headline, but we had actually written the movie, prepped it, we were like trying to get the green light, and then that meeting came and we were like, oh, we're very distracted right now, we're trying to make our thing. So that was the only time, you know, we had to say, no thank you, Michelle Yeoh already said yes, that's the priority, oh my God, we got Michelle Yeoh, leave me alone, yeah.
Congrats, I'm really glad you made that call. So back in the beginning, it took 6 years to write this?
Yeah, we keep like trying to crunch the numbers. We did other stuff in the meantime, but I think Dan first pitched the seed of the idea to me while we were editing our first film, Swiss Army Man, in 2015.
Okay. So how did you know when you were done?
Yeah, we've been talking about that a lot lately with each other, that like, you know, production problems kept pushing things back, and we would think we were done until, you know, Michelle's schedule would change, and then we'd take a look at the script and be like, let's make it better, you know, so it got a lot better. So we like right now we're like, oh my God, thank God, you know, her schedule shifted and we had time to discover that the grandfather character was necessary, and we put him in there, and things like that over the years. And then a lot of times we talk about like the ideas that attract us are ones that we're going to keep trying to rewrite straight up until the sound mix. And so like we knew this idea would never get boring, or we'd never be that confident that we'd nailed it. You know, like it was so manic and unusual that like it kept us really, you know, engaged. Like we didn't feel done until literally the last day of the sound mix. The composers were redoing one of the songs, and we weren't sure if it worked, and we were so nervous that the movie didn't work, and and then we all had dinner.
So how did the cast change the movie during production?
Yeah, drastically. That's one of my favorite things as a writer is once I know who's playing the part, rewriting it with them in mind, you know? Like, I think Dan and I don't start with character. We kind of discover it as we go, and then that's such a gift when you meet someone and they fill the shoes, and you can start interviewing them about their life. You know, Stephanie Hsu made the character of Joy and Jobu wildly different, like her audition and talking to her about her family, and Michelle too, and it was very important to us that we cast people who had personal stories to inject the family with authenticity, and also to make sure that like our translation was good, you know, like find people with who speak the language and have family and can kind of talk about their upbringing and stuff. And so each and every one of them changed their character a lot.
So if you were to analyze how comedic it was going to be at the beginning and how moving it would be at the end, would you have known that ahead of time?
No, yeah. But I think it took shape. By the time we sent the script to Michelle Yeoh, it had become extremely personal, emotional thing, you know. But when we first started writing, it was, you know, that was not the thought, you know. Like, and even while shooting, sometimes the joke was we'd shout to our actors like, "Remember, it's a drama," because they'd be, you know, fighting over butt plug trophies or something, and we'd be like, "Remember, ground it. It's a drama. It's a drama." But we're attracted to tonal shifts, and so like the title was always the title, and it was kind of like the mantra too.
So Todd, I love the way that you open your script. I'm going to read. This is on the front page of the TAR script. It says, based on this script's page count, it would be reasonable to assume that the total running time for TAR will be well under 2 hours. However, this will not be a reasonable film. There will be tempo changes and soundscapes that require more time than is represented on the page, and of course, a great deal of music performed on screen. All this to say, if you are mad enough to greenlight this film, be prepared for one whose necessary length represents these practical accommodations. So Focus was mad enough to greenlight the film, and they gave you total freedom, as I understand it.
Yes, they did. They gave me total freedom, and the script wouldn't exist without them. There was no pitch, there was no beat sheet, there was no nothing. It was the beginning of the pandemic. It was the middle of March in 2020, like probably for a lot of us. I was very happy to have something to do other than try to drive up and down Highway 1 in Maine looking for toilet paper, you know.
When did Lydia Tarr first enter your brain?
I think I started thinking about this character about like maybe 10 years before I started the script. You know, and if you're lucky enough to be paid to write, most of the time, it's based on other people's work. You're adapting work, and that's a giant, exciting opportunity, especially if you get to work alongside whoever's work it is. You know, I've been very lucky that way. You know, we all have notebooks, you know, and sometimes things just stay in the notebook. And I never thought I would have any place to put this character until then. So, you know, people
often say, well, you're really interested in classical music, and did you always have this idea? And I was like, no, not at all. I mean, she was sitting atop a power structure. She was sitting atop, it could have been a media company or anything, you know. But she kept bothering me, and she wouldn't go away, you know. So, yeah, I mean that.
And somewhere in there, Cate Blanchett somehow appeared in your brain, too.
Yeah, Kate and I had met some years earlier. Joan Didion and I had written a script together, and we very much wanted her to play the lead. And we met with Kate in New York, and that was kind of a life-changing meeting because even though that project ultimately didn't come to fruition for some of the reasons we've discussed before, which is, you know, it had a woman lead. It was period. They didn't want to give us enough money to make it properly, so it didn't happen. But the discussion around it was so incredible. The dialogue in terms of being able to be in conversation with someone like Kate, you know, because she, you know, her ability as a performer is manifest. We all know that. She's one of the greatest actors who's ever lived, period. But she thinks like a writer, and she thinks like a filmmaker. And so you're having a conversation with more than your equal. She looks at the whole thing, not just her part, you know, that often actors are ghettoized into. So, you know, I don't think about actors when I write, ever, because it's based on IP. I try to be a humble amateur reader, you know, and you have these composite people in your head. The last thing I want to ever think about is an actor, because I'm definitely going to be reductive in terms of the character, and probably reductive to the actor based on something I've seen them do before. So she stubbornly appeared when I first started drafting, and she didn't go away, and so I just didn't question. I thought, okay, well, that's it. It's meant to be her. And actually, you know, similar to what you're talking about, Daniel, it's like it became much easier. You know, I felt guilty doing, but at the same time, there's a real pleasure in writing for somebody that you're semi-acquainted with. But that's somebody based on those meetings that Joan and I had with her, not based on her work. You know?
Did you intend for there to be a lot of ambiguity about the reality of the film as it unfolds? There's so many ways to interpret the movie, and you left it open in that way.
Well, as Mitzi Fabelman would say, you know, movies are dreams, you know, that you never forget. And I don't believe that movies are supposed to be documentaries. So those are not the kind of films I'm attracted to. I kind of want to get involved in a different way.
And to the extent that writing continues into the editing room, talk a little bit about the editing process for you. You tried lots of different things.
Yeah, like all, you know, like any of us that direct our stuff. And, you know, it's the old saw, which is that the final draft is in the edit, you know. It's never finished, you know. Screenplays are wonderful things, and they're important things, but it's a beginning, you know. And I think that it's always trying to figure out, it's that weird thing, you know, movies are very plastic until they aren't, and they say, nope, I'm not going to do that. You know, and again, like, when do you stop? I think it's really important to know when you're done, you know. And for this film, it was very horrifying to know that, to try to figure that out, because Monica Willey, my editor, and I, we were up in Scotland. We were between Haddington and East Lothian up there, and we would walk these hedgerows every single day for 5 miles, every day before we'd start work. Or I would walk them alone and just mumble to myself, you know, why isn't this fucking working? And what, you know, what does it all mean, you know? And Kate had kind of fucked us up, because she was so good that, you know, when we first cut that first scene with Adam Gopnik, like 3 minutes in, that was it. We didn't see her anymore. And that character became very, very real for Mona and I. And so we really tried to ask ourselves, like, if we were making a documentary, you know, that wasn't fantastic, how fair should we be to this character, and how do we feel about this character and what is our relationship to her, and that would change often, you know, and we'd be polar opposite after watching it down the same day, you know, and what we began to figure out was a lot of it had to do with what we brought into the room on that particular day, you know, how much sleep we got, and if we had too much whiskey the night before, whatever, you know, and there was just a certain point where we ran out of time, you know, and then we had to stop.
Thank you. So Martin, congratulations for the Golden Globe for Best Comedy.
Thank you.
But there's some debate about this movie.
That is not a comedy.
Yeah.
I'd probably go along with that debate, yeah.
Why?
I find it quite sad. There's some jokes in it, but I guess overall it's not the... I guess it's sort of all about existential dread, so it's... that doesn't usually throw up a lot of laughs. But I don't know, I guess most of my stuff has been some kind of balance between funny and dreadful.
Tragic.
Tragic, let's go with that.
Tragic comedy, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I like that. I'm interested in those kinds of stories that are sad and maybe bleak, but don't leave you in that place. And I think humor is a way to, you know, sweeten that pill, maybe.
My favorite scene in the movie, and I might not be alone, it gets me going every time I think about it, is when Colin Farrell's character gets beat up, and he gets on, and you know, Brendan Gleeson's character comes over and picks him up and puts him on the wagon. Why does that make me cry so much? And was that a central scene for you? And what were you trying to do there?
Weirdly, it was always sort of pivotal, almost too pivotal. I think it was always hanging over Colin's head throughout the shoot that it was, maybe I'd written it to be important or something, which I probably shouldn't have. But I guess it's the fact that up until that point, Brendan Gleeson's character has been sort of stoic and tough and almost cruel. But I guess that scene shows that he's actually not necessarily any of those things. He does care, and all of what he's forcing on Colin's character is that there's something more going on than anger or some easy cutting someone off, I think.
And do you relate to what the Brendan character is going through in terms of having to fight for your creative time?
Not really. Being very lazy, I find that if you don't have projects, you know, you do one every 4 years, there's loads of time. You can watch football, you can travel, you can, you know. Well, that's all I do. So no, but it's an interesting debate, you know, especially after COVID, I think. We all came out of that, I guess, definitely me as a writer, thinking, is making something every 4 years good enough? You know, if we get the time again to be in the world and to do things, should you do something every year, or at least try to? I decided no after that. But no, so no, in that sense, no. And also the whole idea of his character being so tough and angry about it, about art, I don't really subscribe to that tortured artist kind of way of looking at writing or storytelling.
Well, I like the idea that you were able to give both Brendan and Colin roles that showed what they could do beyond what they'd been ever given before. Was that one of your goals?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've seen all their stuff, and they've always been brilliant in smaller things, you know, throughout their careers. But definitely, I wanted to get them back together. We kind of struck gold when we made In Bruges together as my first thing. We didn't know each other particularly. I'd made the short with Brendan, but as a group of three, we didn't know each other, and it just worked perfectly. We had a great time, and it came out well. So we always sort of knew we wanted to get back together. But I think maybe in the script of this, there was a lot more room left for what happens between the scenes or in the silent moments. There's probably the first script where I left lots of silences and had sort of just descriptions of landscapes and animals and things like that. Whereas Bruges was kind of one-liner after one-liner, and it was very structured, I guess. But this had room. But I think the bits of In Bruges that I really liked, looking back on it, was, you know, the times when Colin is looking in a mirror and thinking about his own doom or whatever he was doing. Leaving room for those things in the script was for those actors to show in silent moments, in their eyes almost, what they can do was a big part of it.
Thank you. So Ruben, did you put several elements of your real life into Triangle of Sadness?
Yes, I'd always try to do that in the movies. I mean, when I started to write Triangle of Sadness, the reason that I started with the film was because I met my wife. She works as a fashion photographer. And she told me a lot of interesting stories about her profession, and I thought it was interesting to hear these stories that came from the inside, from an industry that I've seen so much from the outside. And I quite quickly understood that I wanted to make a film that is about beauty as a currency, because she told me many stories about models that was coming from different parts of society, and because of that they were born beautiful, they could elevate through class society. And I thought it was a very interesting aspect. For example, it was a 19-year-old guy that she knew that was working as a car mechanic, and he got street casted, and 2 years later he's one of the best paid models in the whole industry of fashion. And so in 2 years he did a crazy class journey because of this. And the problem as being a model is that you don't really have any exit, because the career is short, and when you are, this guy, he was getting bald. All of a sudden he was losing his hair. And what should he do? You know, like what should he do as an exit? So that was the starting point. So I was looking at like beauty as a currency, sexuality as a currency, and I started to think about my own life. Where do I have an experience of this kind of situation? Where do I have any kind of moment when I have to deal with this? Because I don't want to get too intellectual when I'm making the movies. I want also to have situations that you can relate to as an audience, and maybe that you have experienced yourself. And all of a sudden, I got to think about when me and my wife met, and we were going and eating dinner, and, you know, over and over again going to these dinners, and I was always paying. And I come from I'm brought up by a single mother, you know. I'm coming from like a Swedish middle class, the social democracy, that kind of a background. She comes from a German family there, where it's like much more patriarchalic, and her mother was a housewife. So the idea and expectation, the cultural expectation of who I should be as a man and who she should be as a woman didn't really 100% fit. The thing was that I liked her so much, I was willing to take a fight for my standpoint. And, you know, like, okay, so the first bill comes on the table, the first night, okay, I pick it up, I take it. The second time, okay, I pick it up. The third time, I start to feel soon I have to take the bull by the horn. And what happens is also that she says, oh, thank you so much, honey. Tomorrow I will invite you. And I'm like, phew, she knows what I'm dealing with. You know, I got a little bit relieved. But the next day, when we were sitting there and eating dinner, I'm starting to get more and more nervous the closer I get to the check being put on the table. And when I'm sitting there and waiting for the check being put on the table, I'm just praying, please make this easy for me now. Because as a man, if the check is not picked up from the table, it's going to be so painful for me. And the check is put on the table, and she doesn't do like Yaya does in the film. In the film, Yaya is taking up her makeup mirror and doing her lips, you know, and then she doesn't happen to see it. But the bill is there in front of me, and the table. I'm like, do you want anything more, or are you going to pick it up, you know? But I can't stand it. I feel like my male pride is in a dilemma here now. And after a while, I just lean over a little bit to have a look how much it is. And then she says, thank you, honey. That's so sweet of you. And, you know, I see my male pride taking up my wallet, taking out my card, and putting it on the bill, and I'm just like, I'm not going to have this conversation now because I'm too furious to talk about this, so I will never get out this with any dignity left. But she is, of course, like asking me, so what's up? And I'm like, no, nothing. Come on, I can see something is wrong. Tell me what's up. And I go, and I say the most stupid line you can say in that moment, which is, well, you know, if you say thank you, honey, you kind of force me to pay the bill. And then it's a war between the sexes. That is man and woman. And she goes, well, we can split the bill if you like. I can wipe up a calculator and like how many glasses of wine? So it's like, and the whole incident with the bill is with ending me furious in the elevator, saying like, she took a 50 euro bill from the table because I paid in the blah blah blah. Maybe you have seen the film. Anyway. I'm saying, so if you wanted to pay the bill, why did you take the 50 euro bill from the table? And she goes like, takes up the 50 euro bill and pushes it down my shirt sleeve, you know? And I get so furious. I like, this is not about money, this is not about money, which it is, of course. And I'm taking the 50 euro bill and pushing it in between the elevator and the elevator, so it falls down the elevator shaft. And then the door is closing in between us. I'm trying to push the button, like, you know, hey, this is not about money. And the elevator goes down. So I leave her and I go in the corridor and I'm like, I did the right thing. I was standing up for myself. But what happens is that the corridor is long. So before I even get to the room, I start to doubt, like, did I do the right thing, really? So at the point, it's like, no, oh my God, I have to go back. What did I do, you know? And I go back and I can't find her. And everything that basically plays out in that scene is coming from that night. And it was a super painful night. But it was also a beautiful night because, you know, when I'm in the room and I'm like texting her and trying to call her and she doesn't pick it up and I'm like just desperate and I'm like, okay, I'm going to bed, you know. And then she comes back. And in the moment when she comes back, there's a possibility for us to be completely honest with each other. And it's a certain point in the beginning of a relationship, you know, where you like take down your guard and you start to talk and you start to tell each other things that you wouldn't dare half a year later when you have established the relationship. So all these things happened during one night. And I was like, the day after, it was a very, very painful moment for me because I have a hard time to think about anything else that I'm more ashamed of, but when my male pride is having a dilemma with money and economy. But I wrote it down, and then I decided, okay, in one movie I'm going to keep this.
And you did marry her.
Yes, and I think also it was also because I brought it up, you know, because this doesn't fit me, and yeah, but we are married.
So now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, when you were in the editing room and you had written and you had shot the entire throwing up, hurling sequence, which is brilliant, you know, it's just extraordinary. Did you want to kill yourself at that point?
Why? Why?
Because it was hard to pull off.
I mean, what happened in the editing is that when you were sitting there together and like trying to put these puzzle pieces it took a half a year to edit that scene, basically. And we got a longer time because of the pandemic. So there was a possibility of like, okay, push the release one more year. So I was sitting and editing that scene for a long time. And what was interesting was that when you are sitting there in front of the screen yourself, you get this image just becomes completely normal for you. So I made that scene in the first editing version. It was probably 20 minutes long or something, the vomiting. And when I had a first test screening of the film and I was going together with the audience and sitting together with the audience, that's the first point when I realized what I have done. And people were screaming straight out, and they were like, yeah. And then I felt that I had succeeded because because you know what I wanted to do. I wanted to push the scene 10 steps further than the audience could expect. Because if I go just a little bit with the scene, it becomes nothing. But if I go a little bit further, then you create all of a sudden a risky space in the cinema. And if I go even further, then the audience is starting to think, where is he going to take us? And I want it to be like a risk, a part of the film that is always a risk for the audience. But then I had to cut it down, of course, so it wasn't other parts of the film that were suffering later on because of the whole dynamics.
Got it. Okay, thank you, everybody. That was great. So now, each of you is going to tell us how your process of writing, how it works for you. How do you write? How do you find structure? How does it work? Kazuo, you had never written a screenplay before. So how did you figure out how to do this one?
Well, I had actually written little screenplays before. I've written for TV right at the beginning of my career. I had written a Merchant Ivory one. But you're right, I don't know how to write screenplays. I don't have a set routine. I don't know what you're supposed to do first, what you're supposed to know before you start. But I took comfort from the fact that I've been writing novels for all this time, and I still don't have like a routine of how to write novels. And every time I take on a project, I have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes I know how to finish, sometimes I know the whole story, sometimes I do a draft all the way to the end of the story. And so I suspect if I carry on writing screenplays, it's going to be the same. I think every project seems to have its own demands. The starting point seems to be somewhere else, different each time. That's how I found it with writing fiction in general, And I think that maybe it makes life very inconvenient, but I think that's probably not a bad thing. You have to kind of shape your process to fit the project, and I think that's probably not a bad thing. It's a pain, but I mean it's probably the correct way to do it, I think.
Ryan?
Well, my dad was not in the movie making business at all. He was in the home building business, but he loved movies, and I think he always kind of wished that he could work in a creative field. And so when I was a teenager, he took me to a Robert McKee seminar. It was a big thing. I was like 17. He drove me up to Santa Monica, and it was also a great just like day together. But like. And McKee, I think, gets a lot of shit, and there's that scene in Adaptation where, and I think he's sometimes seen as kind of the inciting incident by page 30, and this by this, and this by this type, the rules type guy. And this is something I was very happy and gratified to hear that Daniel and Daniel have in common. Everything to this day that I know about how story works goes back to those couple days in that seminar, and structure was the thing that unlocked it for me in terms of understanding how you keep an audience engaged throughout the course of a film, and being able to zoom back and look at the roadmap that for whatever reason made sense to me. And that's how to this day I start very structurally, and there's and God, Daniel, I'm probably going to steal, because there's a beautiful thing that you guys said at another thing we were at. Can I just steal it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, steal it.
Sorry.
You're making me look
so sorry.
I think it was Dan Kwan, not me.
It was Dan. Yeah, the meaning of the movie is contained within its structure, and that for me is and that's not the only way to do it, obviously, but that's the way that's always been for me. When I find the shape of the thing, then I know what it is, and then I can start zooming in. So the first 90% of the process, I work in little notebooks, and I just make notes and I outline, and it's not until I have the entire, kind of like what you do with pitching, it sounds like I need the entire thing mapped out, and then it's only the very end. I'll do 8 months of that, and then like 3 weeks of panicked fast writing, typing it down, but that's the very last step for me.
Leslie?
Yeah, so I'm very much, I work with a writing partner, so I'm the sort of macro and he's the micro. So I love story architecture, so a little bit like you, Ryan, I'm sort of the structural piece, and he's more of the sort of nitty-gritty, moment by moment. But I think to that end, I'm really drawn by, my starting point is a feeling. And so for All Quiet, it was the historical context. So I just wanted that feeling of understanding where it sits in the world. And that feeling, regardless of which script it is, kind of pervades every single thing. And I always go back to what that feeling was that I started with.
Sarah?
It really changes, I think, from film to film, and certainly it changes a lot. I have 3 kids under 10, so suddenly, there's no routine. There's no process. You write when somebody naps or, you know, bonks their head and has to lie down. And it just, it's great moments. And I just think it becomes this kind of chaotic thing if you just grab 10 minutes and all of that, those conditions you needed to set out as a writer before kids become ridiculous. So I actually think it was the best training for becoming a different kind of writer, which I really needed, was to just let go of that preciousness and just grab whatever second I have and to be thinking about it while I'm doing other things instead of sort of needing to carve out that time. I do feel like at the very beginning of a process, I kind of put up on a board what are my non-negotiable moments and images. And I would say with my other films, 80% of those stayed in. And with this film, I think 10% of them did. And I think what I've learned as a writer, probably through making this film, was just a kind of rigor and ruthlessness and ability to try to look at the whole instead of clinging and being attached to these moments. And I think my real ambition in the writing process for this one was, I'd love to not have 10 years later to look back and see where I could have cut 15 minutes. I'd love to just figure that out up front. So efficiency became really important to me with this film. And then the other thing that I just learned, which is weird that it took me this long to learn, is to act out all of the characters and actually play each one of them. I mean, badly. I didn't cast myself for good reason. But that really helped to actually be saying the words and feeling if it was working or not.
So do you have an office in your house?
I have a little shed in my backyard that people make escape attempts to. So I rarely am left alone in said shed. There's a lot of visitors, and I have like little writing toys now. So sometimes people will sit beside me and either write themselves or work on their, like the little one works on a writing toy, and that seems to have helped a little bit.
Tony?
I find writing really difficult, and I have spent my entire life in a state of terror about doing it. So my writing process is to avoid writing at all costs, and then you sort of develop tricks to trick yourself into doing it. I always start by reading a lot, and I used to think that was, I mean, it can be a way of avoiding ever having to actually write yourself. But it's also, I think, I've come to understand over the years, there's a certain function that it serves of pulling yourself out of yourself and into another place. So somebody had mentioned a feeling of fraudulence earlier. I think, everybody feels like, Isaiah Berlin says, that it's like counterfeiting money. It's a lot easier to believe in it if you didn't make it yourself. And so reading somebody else's writing, poetry, historical research, as the reading process really helps me get going. There are certain writers, Dickens or Wallace Stevens or Melville, who I know will always get juices flowing, so I kind of go back to them routinely. And then outlining and sort of talking to myself on paper. For me, the scariest thing is when you start to write dialogue, because that's the gold. I mean, that's the thing that you're working towards. And I do a lot of stuff to get ready to do that, and then it starts to happen on its own. It's it's not a method. It's just that's a grab bag of various neurotic maladaptations and malformations. Anyway, so there you go.
Daniel?
Yeah, I relate to like pieces of what everybody's saying, and I don't know what my good answer is going to be. But I feel like as I'm really drawn to collaboration, like I said before, and our process is kind of like just this messy, try everything, journey, that takes years, and it's kind of fun to try a new process every few months, and there's a new part of it, and I think that's why I'm drawn to screenwriting and couldn't write a book, is like, it never feels done. It's just a bunch of problem solving for years, and you just get a kick out of being like, oh, we solved that problem today, and on to the next process. And I never have to like write something down and feel like that's the final product, because eventually like I give it away to an actor or a crew member, and it's just kind of like a blueprint. But yeah, I think I like problem solving, and I feel like in a lot of ways Kwan is more of a traditional writer, and then I'll like cheerlead and give notes and try to solve the thing that he's stuck on, and yeah, so sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be on this stage. Yeah, it's terrifying. But I also love pitching.
Are you in the same room?
Yeah, so like we're in the same room often when we're outlining, and we're constantly trying to make each other laugh or like tell a story that moves each other. And the pitching process, like Ruben said, is something I really learn a ton from. And if I can sit down with a collaborator and talk them through the story, and they say that sounds good, that's a huge, relief. So in this movie, for the first time, we tried like we had re-outlined it drastically after a bad version, and we sat down with 3 friends and pitched the movie to them, and I thought it was going to take half an hour, and it took like over 2 hours, and it was basically we acted out and pitched the whole movie, and one of them was our editor Paul, and like he cried during the pitch, and I was like, damn, like it gave me a lot of encouragement that you rarely get when you're just sitting at your computer. And then the scene that made him cry, we cut out, yeah.
Todd.
Yeah. Well, I really have to pee, so I'm going to be really short. So
We're almost done.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, like you're saying, Daniel, like I can relate to, what we're all saying. I think for me, it's, I wake up and I walk in the morning. And I always do that. I think what's changed, when you're adapting material, you get to sort of plunge into somebody else's work, and that's a way of reading. But you also have the luxury of at least some kind of structure or scaffolding to make war with. Right? Because I don't believe you should make books on tape. I think that if you're going to make a screen adaptation, you should make it something else. I firmly, that's my sort of belief. But I think that I learned a lot by working with other writers. I think, and probably for me, it's when do you start? Like, if you're not really ready to start and you go off, you're in big trouble. So when do you start? When do you know you're ready to leave the gate? And sometimes I've, left too early. And I think I learned a great deal working on an adaptation for about a year with Jonathan Franzen. And John is a very structured writer. He wants to sit down and talk through he believes in the outline. He's convinced of the outline. But it's not that outline process, that's the writing process. When you actually write the scenes and the dialogue, it's like, poof, write 60 pages in 5 days, done. And they're good, But that's because he's such a rigorous person in terms of how he details something out. So I think that really helped me being alone on this, because I think I kind of did that with myself. I'm a mumbler. My family hates it. My sister used to hate it. She'd say, why are you talking to yourself? I talk to myself all the time. So that's part of the reason I take the walk, so I don't bother anyone. So I'm kind of my own, writing partner that way, I guess. Now I really have to pee.
Do you want to take off and come back?
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Okay. Martin, I think we're to you.
Damn, you let I was going to do a really long answer just to keep Todd away. And just keep looking over. No. Conversely, I don't like to outline. I don't like to plot things out at all. Even though my stuff can be quite plotty, I kind of like the surprise of like one dialogue scene telling you what the next scene is and being surprised at that. And I think that's sometimes why twists and turns can happen in some of my stuff, is that I didn't know that was going to happen next, etc. So I know in this one, the threat of the fingers, when Brendan does that, have you seen it? I didn't know he was going to say that when he came into the bar, and that was like 20, 25 pages in. So that was a nice surprise to me. But then that kind of gives you like the plot for the next 20, 30 pages. In fact, it gives you the plot towards the end of the film, because it all has to connect to that after that point. But for this one, also, I just wanted to... I'd written a version of it about 8 years ago, which wasn't very good. I sent it to Colin and Brendan, and they agreed. So I scrapped it, but then went back to it about 3.5 years ago, reread it, and the first few pages were the same as is in this version, and I just got rid of everything else and felt free not to have it be about plot this time. I kind of wrote on the first page that it can just be about the sadness of a breakup. And I was sort of going through something similar at the same time, and I thought, just keep it at that and see what happens. And that's why it's probably my least plotty film, and hopefully the saddest. Yeah, and I think that leaves room for acting too, when it doesn't have to be plot twist after plot twist.
Great. Ruben, again.
Well, I have...
Did the pitching part.
Yeah, I can start to pitch. But one thing that I think is important for me, and the luxury that I've had, have been to work on one project at a time. And so when I decided, okay, we're going to do Triangle of Sadness, then it's a process where I'm only focused on that project. And you are constantly walking around and thinking about it, of course. And all of a sudden, you see something on the street that is a great inspiration for your scene, and then you put it into the script. And the other thing is that as I said before, that I think all of you have said also, that to be open about the process for me have been super important. That I'm not scared of telling people what I'm doing, and I'm not scared of their reaction, that it will take away energy from me. Because I think that's maybe what happens when you're trying to protect your idea, is that I don't want to tell it because maybe someone will not respond so good to it. But I try to stay like confident and tell them, okay, this is what I'm working on. And I do it over and over again, as I said. And for me, it is like playing ping pong with different brains. It is like, okay, let's have fun with this idea. What can happen with it, you know? And so many times as I said, I have gotten the best ideas from people that I pitched to. So for example, when I was pitching Triangle of Sadness for the students that I'm teaching in film school in Gothenburg, then I said, it starts in the fashion world, and it goes to a luxury yacht, and then it ends up on a deserted island. And we have billionaires and models on a deserted island, and a mechanic from the yacht, a male mechanic from the yacht. And then it's one student that just is like, isn't it more interesting if it's a woman? And I'm like, he's 100% right, this guy. So then I rewrote that part and made that character into a woman. So it is something about that to not have too much prestige and really be open for other people's ideas, and never kill the ideas in the beginning. Always play back the ball. Aha, why? Ding. And then you get something back, and you can move to a point where you feel like, wow, we reached something that I could never expect when we started this conversation. And from that point, when you feel that you have a structure, I also need really a structure before I can sit down and write. Then the process of like writing it through, reading it through, writing it through again, reading it through starts.
So I want to know from some powerful being here whether we have time for one more question or whether we should wrap this up. Are you all right with one more? Are you? You ready? Okay. It's what was the most challenging scene that you had to write? Kazuo.
I honestly can't think of just bring it down to one thing, but yeah, how to end the thing was a problem for me. I had a very clear idea of the emotion I wanted the film to land on and the audience to land on. But what precisely, how precisely do you achieve that? And in the end, and it took quite a few drafts to come to this very obvious conclusion, was to put the big, the big climactic scene, as close to the end as possible. But for some reason, it never occurred to me. It was kind of the minutes going by after that. But that for me was the difficult thing, and it often is for me when telling a story. What is a great ending? How do you make the thing linger in the audience's mind for hours, maybe years afterwards? And I think it's got so much to do with how you end the thing.
Ryan?
There's a big scene right in the middle of the movie where that had to accomplish. It's a scene between Daniel's character and Janelle's character, and it's a scene that had to accomplish a lot. It's a scene that kind of finally shows the audience the movie's hand in terms of what the movie is actually doing. It's a scene that has to set up kind of the mission-based plot that is going to drive the rest of the film. It's a scene that introduces for the first time the main character of the movie and has to make you emotionally invested in her, otherwise the back half won't work. And the whole thing is just two people talking across a table for like 8 minutes. It's really, really long. So yeah, that took a few drafts.
I got it. Leslie?
Yeah, probably the action sequences, because there's quite a few of them, and how do you differentiate one from the next? So I think for me it's grounding it in character, making sure that within the action there's some sort of character piece in there that is impactful.
Okay. Sarah?
There's a scene where one of the characters has really been, in a way, an obstacle for the rest of the community. Jessie Buckley's character receives an apology from her mother, which becomes really transformative for her and allows her to move forward alongside her community. And it's a scene that wasn't in the book and was based on a lot of reading I'd been doing of Harriet Lerner's work, Why Won't You Apologize? And what does a good apology look like, both from the giver and the receiver. And it had to be this transformative moment, and we shot one side of it on Jessie's reaction to the apology, which was really seismic and incredible. And we had a crew member who had grown up with a lot of abuse in a similar religious community, and he kind of had this implosion of realization that's what it had been like for him when he realized everything he had been taught to forgive, was not okay. And then we turned around and we realized that the apology I had scripted for Sheila McCarthy's character wasn't adequate in terms of what he would have needed to hear. And so this crew member kind of came forward with his experience of what he would need to hear from his parents in order to move through that relationship with them again. And so it became this kind of collective process of everybody sharing their experiences, which resulted in what's kind of the climactic scene of the film. And so it was incredibly challenging because you're suddenly holding a lot of people's experiences and trying to be respectful of them, but it also ended up being the moment in the film I'm most proud of, because it was such a struggle and it was such a collective process of finding it.
Tony?
The hardest one was when Stephen was telling me, when I was interviewing him, he told me the story about this bully and filming this bully. It was originally, I think, a track meet, and then showing the film footage of the track meet to the school and making this bully look sort of like Apollo, and then the bully cornering him in the locker room and bursting into tears. And it was such a weird story. And I thought, well, that has to go into the movie. And I said, well, did you ever talk to him about like why this happened? And Stephen said, no. And I said, well, why do you think it happened? And Stephen said, I have no idea. And I think we both decided that we definitely wanted to include it in the movie, the breaking down thing. And I feel responsible for this. I made a big mistake. I thought that our job was to figure out why the kid had cried. And so we wrote a version and we filmed it of the moment in the movie when Sammy is in the hallway and this bully comes and falls apart. And in the original version, they sort of work out why he's crying, and there's they kind of bond with each other, and it's sort of the end of the movie, although it's not the end of the movie, and who cares, because it's not what you're watching. And Stephen let me into the editing trailer to look at the thing while we were still filming, and I said, I think we screwed this up. It just finally I thought, oh, the real point of this is not the audience understanding why this kid is crying, but that Sammy has absolutely no idea why his film has had this. It's just a shock that it's had this effect. So I did a rewrite of the scene. We had to rebuild the whole hallway because we'd lost the high school where we had done it. And when I was standing around one day sort of like worrying about it, Rick Carter, the art director for the movie, came up and said, "What are you worrying about?" And I told him about the thing. And he said, "God, it sounds an awful lot like smoking pot and surrendering control." And I don't smoke pot because I can't, I'm Jewish, or I have like no kid. I can't tolerate any kind of. I just go to sleep. So, but I thought that was really great. And of course, it's the '60s, and so of course in California there would be that we fixed it, and I'm also really proud of that scene because I think it was really important that we solved it, and it's a lesson. You sometimes think that the scene is about one thing, and it's actually really about something completely different. So,
Daniel?
Other Daniel always obsesses over the first scene of our movies, and a lot of times I'll get mad at him because I'm like, there's a lot of other scenes to work on, and I'm like, we already solved those problems, and that was true on this one again, where he would kind of return to the whole opening sequence often and kind of reimagine it and rewrite it and add more things in that then we'd have to debate whether to take it out, and but it was. We both agreed it was so important to lay the groundwork of this journey and get the audience invested in this family before we start kind of introducing all these hijinks. So it was so hard and so hard to know what to keep and what's just a clever Easter egg that's not actually serving the story and what actually should stay. And, there was a whole opening credits thing that we shot, but kind of cut most of that out, and there was like a point in the edit where we cut the whole opening sequence in half because someone had said get to the front, this needs to move quicker, and we watched that just ripple effect and ruin the movie, in a test screening, and then in both of our movies we added one shot in the opening that made a huge difference. And both times it was Dan obsessing and being like, the opening doesn't work, and this time it was because people felt like the story wasn't set up as a mother-daughter story enough, and we did a pickup shoot that's just Joy fighting tears while driving. So after the whole opening sequence, you just cut and you just see her driving and she's trying not to cry. And then it cuts to her mom sitting down at a table, and that shot, no dialogue, was we never got that note again, and so it was a testament to Dan being right, yeah.
Todd.
Oh boy, it's really interesting that you say that, because for me that's the most poignant point, is actually when he's sitting on the floor leaning back against the lockers before even the bully comes in, when he's alone. It's just this, you're with him.
Todd, are we done?
We're done. Yeah.
Do you need to pee again?
Yeah, I'm getting to that age, I need a bucket of sand off, stage left.
We're almost finished. Martin.
Todd's answer. I think the end scene between the two guys on the beach is probably the toughest one to write, to try and get some kind of subtlety about leaving it with maybe a little bit of hope in it, but still being true to the horrible place that Colin's in, and the anger, the justified anger that he feels, to be true to that, to be true also to Brendan being completely honest about his sincere apology, you know, getting all that stuff just right. We filmed like 2 pages of it. I think the version now is like 7/8 of a page. But it was the first time I think I'd left something on the page which I knew wasn't right, but had enough elements within those 2 pages to, in the edit, get what we needed.
And we're finishing things off with Ruben.
Well, I think it's always. What was your question from the beginning? It's like that.
The most difficult scene to write.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that for me, there's always one part of the process with working in a film where you feel this is a complete failure. It will never work out. And I always feel surprised that this feels so true in every project that you're doing. And then some way you find a way to work it out. And for me, when it came to Triangle of Sadness, it was the 3-part structure, that you start in the fashion world, you go to the luxury yacht, and then you go to a deserted island. And when I was writing the script and reading through the script, the feeling was like, it's really, really hard to, this far into a feature film, start the film over again by letting the characters end up on a deserted island. So it was almost like starting a complete new movie. So I had a lot of hassle in order to try to make that work when I was just reading through the script. And maybe I hadn't solved the problem when we actually started to shoot the film and when we shot the film. And the first times that I was watching through the film, I just felt that, how could I be so stupid? It's not going to work. And then, for me, it solves with dynamics of the film. It's so interesting that every time when you have, even if you have a problem that is in the 3rd act, it can be how the dynamics are working in the 1st and the 2nd act, and then all of a sudden the film works. So all these writing and editing problems are very connected for me. So you can have a scene that is feeling like a complete failure, but when you have the right dynamics before you change the in and out points of the scenes that comes before it, all of a sudden it works. So it is such a strange process to edit a movie and to structure a movie and to know how long and how short the scenes should be. And it's really a trial and error. And but in this project, it definitely was like ending up on a deserted island, and now the film's starting up again. And do the audience have energy for this? Are they going to invest in the movie one more time after all this madness? And yeah.
And hurling.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Anne.
I couldn't get enough of it, obviously.